At 1,400 hours on January 16, 1942, Sergeant Jose Calugas was scrubbing rice pots beside his field kitchen in Bataan Province when Battery B's 75mm gun, positioned roughly 1,000 yards north, abruptly went silent. The silence was unmistakable. For 9 straight days, Japanese artillery had been methodically dismantling American gun positions. Every battery that stopped firing stayed that way. Crews were killed, guns smashed, ammunition buried under craters. No one expected recovery. Calugas was 34 years old, with 12 years in the Philippine Scouts, but he wasn't an artilleryman anymore. He was a mess sergeant, responsible for feeding soldiers, not saving them. His hands smelled of rice and grease, not cordite. The Battle of Bataan had begun 10 days earlier, when American and Filipino forces completed their final withdrawal onto the peninsula. 80,000 troops and 26,000 civilians were now compressed into a strip of jungle 60 miles long and barely 20 miles wide. Everything north of them belonged to the Japanese 14th Army. General Masaru Homma had ordered Bataan taken within 50 days. His guns and aircraft had been pounding American positions since January 7th. They knew exactly where the batteries were. Japanese air superiority made concealment almost impossible. Calugas had joined the Philippine Scouts in 1930, trained at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and learned artillery the old way, by repetition until muscle memory replaced thought. He'd been assigned to the 24th Field Artillery, later transferred to the 88th as a mess sergeant. He married, started a family. By 1941, his war was supposed to be fought with ladles, not shells. But Bataan didn't care about job titles. By mid-January, Scout artillery units were operating at half strength. Crews died faster than replacements could be trained. Supplies were gone. Air cover didn't exist. Still, the guns kept firing, because if they didn't, the infantry would be overrun. That morning, Calugas had served lunch to Battery B's crew. Rice, canned salmon, whatever remained. Everyone was already on half rations, and no resupply was coming. Everyone knew it. Afterward, he and his mess detail cleaned equipment near the kitchen area. The guns were placed in the woods to the north, firing continuously at a Japanese infantry column pushing toward the American line. Then the enemy found them. Calugas heard the shells walk into the gun position, 1, 2, then several more. Explosions shook the trees. Dirt and smoke rose above the canopy. Then nothing. No return fire. No concussion. No sound of recoil. Just silence. Calugas waited, hoping for another round. None came. He knew what that meant. Dead crew. Destroyed gun. Or both. The Japanese column was less than 5 minutes from the infantry line. Without artillery, the Americans would be hit head-on. Every gun that went silent made the breakthrough more likely. Calugas didn't wait for orders. He grabbed 16 volunteers from his mess crew in nearby positions. None of them were artillerymen. They would have to cross 1,000 yards of open rice paddies, flat, flooded ground with no cover, under artillery fire and strafing aircraft. Everyone understood the odds. Men caught in the open usually didn't make it. But the gun had to fire again. They ran. Japanese fighters spotted them almost immediately. Machine gun fire stitched across the paddies. Artillery shells began falling among the runners. Men went down. Some froze. Others turned back. Calugas kept running. 900 yards. 800. 700. The bombardment intensified. The Japanese knew exactly what the movement meant. They weren't going to let Americans save that gun. More men fell. By the time Calugas reached the position, he was alone. The 75mm gun lay tipped into a bomb crater, thrown sideways by a direct hit. Bodies were scattered around it. Some dead, some wounded. One gunner was still alive, clutching a shattered shoulder. Calugas dropped into the crater. The breech was intact. The barrel looked straight. The recoil system hadn't failed. The gun wasn't destroyed. It was just out of place. Useless, unless someone put it back. One man couldn't move a 1,500-pound artillery piece, but help appeared. The wounded gunner stayed conscious. 2 more artillerymen from nearby positions followed Calugas in, drawn by the impossible sight of a cook running toward a silenced gun. For men, barely enough. Japanese shells landed closer now, 50 yards, 40, then closer still. Observers were watching. They knew Americans were here. Calugas took command without hesitation. He'd trained on these guns 12 years earlier, but nothing had changed. Artillery drills were eternal. They grabbed the trails. Lifted. 6 inches. Set it down. Lifted again. Another 6. Machine gun fire raked the position from the north. The Japanese column was now 250 yards away, still advancing. They got the gun upright. The wounded private worked the trail spade. The others muscled the carriage onto the firing platform. Kalugas checked the mechanisms: elevation, traverse, breech. All functional. The ammunition dump was untouched. He loaded an armor-piercing round. The Japanese column was bunching at a wooden footbridge over a creek. Trucks, infantry, horse-drawn artillery all compressed into a perfect choke point. Kalugas aimed. He fired. The shell hit the bridge dead center. Wood exploded. The lead truck tipped into the creek. Men scattered. He loaded again, high explosive this time. Fired. The round detonated among stacked vehicles. One truck's ammunition cooked off. Secondary explosions tore through the column. The advance stopped. Japanese soldiers dove for cover. Officers shouted orders Kalugas couldn't hear, but he could see the effect. The column was trapped. Kalugas kept firing. High explosive into infantry concentrations. Armor piercing into vehicles. When the Japanese tried to ford the creek, he dropped shells into the water. Men fell. The column began pulling back. Then the Japanese artillery adjusted. Shells started landing directly on the gun. Every enemy battery in range had locked onto the single weapon that had stopped their advance. Kalugas had fired 18 rounds in 12 minutes. He had seconds left. Stay and die, or move and fight again. He chose to fight. 30 yards west lay dense jungle. Observers couldn't see through it. He could fire, move, vanish, again and again, forcing the Japanese to shell empty ground while the gun lived. Kalugas shouted orders. They heaved the gun toward the tree line. Japanese shells struck the crater they'd just abandoned. Dirt and shrapnel erupted behind them as they disappeared into the trees. The gun was still alive. And so was the line. The men vanished into the jungle and went still. Japanese artillery continued to hammer the empty crater for 2 full minutes. At least 40 shells, exploding exactly where the gun had been moments earlier. Dirt flew. Shrapnel shredded trees. The position was annihilated. But no one was there. When the fire lifted, Jose Kalugas moved immediately. The gun rolled back to the crater's edge. Ammunition came up. Elevation set. The Japanese column north of the destroyed bridge was regrouping. Officers trying to restore order, infantry bunching again. Kalugas fired 3 high-explosive rounds. The shells landed squarely among the massed troops. Men scattered. The column froze. Before observers could adjust, Kalugas ordered the gun hauled back into the trees. 20 seconds later, Japanese artillery obliterated the crater again. The enemy was firing blind now. They knew a gun was operating somewhere nearby, but they couldn't fix its position. Their observers called corrections. Batteries fired. By the time rounds arrived, the gun was gone. Kalugas had turned Japanese artillery doctrine against itself. For the next 6 hours, the pattern repeated. Move the gun. Fire 3 to 5 rounds. Displace immediately. Wait for counter-battery fire. Move again. Again and again. The Japanese fired hundreds of shells, saturating empty ground. They hit nothing but dirt and shattered trees. Meanwhile, Kalugas methodically dismantled their advance. Vehicles destroyed, infantry casualties mounting, command and control steadily eroding. By 1600 hours, he had fired 47 rounds. The Japanese column no longer advanced. Dead and wounded littered the area north of the creek. Burning vehicles blocked the road. Infantry dug in and stayed there. The American line held. Other batteries of the 88th Field Artillery withdrew to new positions during the fighting. They did so without pressure, because one gun, operated by a mess sergeant and 3 volunteers, had bought them time. Ammunition was now critically low. Kalugas counted what remained. 13 armor-piercing, 8 high-explosive, 21 rounds total. Enough for one last mission. The sun was dropping. Japanese artillery fire slowed. Their observers were losing visibility. This was the moment. Kalugas rolled the gun back to the crater's edge one final time. North of the creek, the Japanese had established a command post near a large tree. He could see officers moving, radio antennas erected, maps spread on tables. He loaded armor-piercing. The first round went high, detonating in the canopy. He adjusted elevation. The second round hit dead center. The command post vanished in the explosion. Radios went silent. Officers scattered. Coordination collapsed. Kalugas fired the remaining 19 rounds over the next 30 minutes. Deliberate, precise, each shell placed where it would cause maximum disruption. When the last round was fired, the battlefield fell quiet. The Japanese advance was finished. But Kalugas wasn't done. The gun had to be evacuated before dawn. And his field kitchen, 1,000 yards south, still sat exposed with everything needed to feed Battery B. He found 2 trucks from a retreating supply column. The drivers had orders to abandon anything that couldn't move fast. Kalugas explained the situation, showed them the gun, told them about the kitchen. They agreed. The gun came first. As soon as it was loaded, Japanese artillery resumed fire. They knew something was moving now. Shells began walking along the road. The truck accelerated. Kalugas and the 3 gunners rode in the bed, bracing the gun as the vehicle bounced. Shells landed 50 yards back, then 40. The truck reached the new artillery position 3 miles south at 1900 hours. The gun was intact. The crew alive. Kalugas reported to the battery commander. The officer listened without comment, then ordered him back north for the kitchen. The second truck waited where they had left it. The Japanese were still shelling the area, but darkness reduced their accuracy. Kalugas loaded everything: pots, pans, rice sacks, canned goods. Nothing was left behind. The return trip was uneventful. By 2100 hours, Kalugas was back with Battery B. He set up the kitchen, cooked beans and rice, served the men who had been fighting all day. Then he cleaned the equipment and prepared for morning. The battery commander wrote the report that night. 2 days later, it reached General Douglas MacArthur on Corregidor. MacArthur read it himself. A mess sergeant had crossed 1,000 yards under fire, restored a silenced gun, fought it alone for 6 hours, stopped a Japanese advance, evacuated the weapon, and returned to feeding troops. MacArthur had seen courage before. This was different. He recommended Jose Kalugas for the Medal of Honor. The paperwork moved quickly. On February 24, 1942, the War Department approved it. General Order Number 10 announced the award. But Kalugas would not receive it yet. Bataan was collapsing, and the worst was still coming. The Japanese promised food and medical care for prisoners. That promise was a lie. What followed became known as the Bataan Death March. When the surrender order came, Battery B prepared exactly as instructed. Guns were destroyed before capture. Breech mechanisms smashed with sledgehammers. Sand poured into barrels. Weapons rendered useless. Then they waited. Jose Kalugas faced a danger no one else did. He was a Medal of Honor recipient. Japanese intelligence monitored American communications. If the Japanese discovered who he was, he would be executed, or worse, kept alive for interrogation and torture. Survival now depended on anonymity. The official general order announcing his Medal of Honor was still in his field pack. Kalugas dug a hole near a tree, buried the paper deep, and memorized the location. Then he gathered the men of Battery B and gave a simple instruction. Forget the medal. Never mention it. If questioned, he was just a cook. They agreed without hesitation. Everyone understood the stakes. The march began April 10, 1942. 76,000 prisoners, Americans and Filipinos, were ordered to walk 65 miles from Bataan to Camp O'Donnell. The Japanese said it would take 4 days. They provided no food, no water, no medical aid. Men who couldn't walk were to be left behind. In practice, they were beaten, bayonet, or shot. The first day was survivable. Weak men still moved. Discipline held. The second day broke people. The heat was relentless. No shade, no water. Men collapsed. Guards killed anyone who stopped. Bodies were left where they fell. Prisoners stepped over corpses and kept moving. Anyone who tried to help the fallen died with them. On the third day, malaria hit Kalugas. Fever, chills, delirium. For most men, malaria on the march was a death sentence. For Kalugas, it became protection. Japanese guards avoided sick prisoners. Disease frightened them. Kalugas leaned into it, shaking harder than necessary, wrapping himself in burlap, making the illness visible. The fever was real. The performance made it worse. It worked. Guards moved past him and targeted others. Kalugas stayed in the middle of the column. Never at the front where strong prisoners drew attention. Never at the rear where weak prisoners were executed. Middle meant anonymity. Middle meant survival. By the fourth day, the road was lined with bodies every few hundred yards. The sun accelerated decay. The smell was constant. Men who had survived months of combat died without firing a shot. On the fifth day, the survivors reached San Fernando. They were forced into metal freight cars, 100 men per car designed for 30. No ventilation. No water. Temperatures exceeded 120 degrees. Men died standing up, held upright by the press of bodies. After 4 hours, the doors opened at Capas. Dozens of corpses fell out of each car. The survivors walked the final 8 miles to Camp O'Donnell. Calugas was still alive. Camp O'Donnell was not a camp. It was a killing ground. Built for 10,000 prisoners, it held 50,000 by mid-April. One water spigot. No sanitation. Dysentery everywhere. Bodies stacked outside barracks until burial details dragged them to mass graves. Men died at a rate of 30 to 50 per day. The guards did not intervene. Calugas arrived April 14th. At intake, guards stripped prisoners of anything valuable. Beatings were random, arbitrary, recreational. Calugas' malaria, half real, half performance, kept guards away. They shoved him toward a barracks and moved on. Inside, 800 men were packed into a building designed for 200. No beds, no blankets, wooden floors slick with sweat and waste. Food came once a day, sometimes not at all. Survival was governed by one rule. The strong might live. The weak would die. Calugas studied patterns. Guards beat prisoners who made eye contact. Beat those who walked too slowly. Beat those who walked too fast. The safe speed was average. Eyes down. No expression. Invisible. When burial details were called, Calugas volunteered. The work was horrific, but movement meant circulation. Circulation meant survival. Months passed. May, June, July, August. Men died daily. Malaria returned in cycles. Each fever spike kept guards away. Each recovery bought more time. By September, Calugas had survived 5 months. Most of the men who arrived with him were gone. In January 1943, a Filipino provincial official petitioned for his release. The Japanese sometimes freed Filipinos for agricultural labor. The official claimed Calugas was needed for rice production. The petition was approved. On January 15, 1943, 1 year and 1 day after stopping the Japanese column, Calugas walked out of Camp O'Donnell. He weighed 40 pounds less. His body was wrecked. His mind carried things that never left. But he was alive. The Japanese assigned him to a rice mill in Pampanga. 12-hour days. Minimal food. Constant supervision. It was still better than the camp. And now, for the first time since the surrender, Calugas could think. Filipino guerrilla units operated across Luzon. Former soldiers. Escaped prisoners. Civilians who refused occupation. They needed men with training. They needed Calugas. A resistance contact approached him quietly in March 1943. The guerrillas knew who he was. They knew about the medal. They wanted him. But leaving immediately would draw attention. Calugas waited. Patience had kept him alive this long. And the war was far from over. The plan was simple. Gather information first. Learn Japanese routines. Pass intelligence to the resistance. Escape only when the moment was right. Jose Calugas agreed. By April 1943, the former mess sergeant, Medal of Honor recipient, and survivor of Bataan and Camp O'Donnell had become a spy inside a Japanese-controlled rice mill. The Japanese never suspected the cook they had captured was now working against them. For 6 months, Calugas observed everything. He memorized patrol schedules, counted supply trucks, noted which roads were guarded and which were ignored, tracked officer movements and shift changes. Resistance couriers arrived disguised as farmers selling vegetables. Information passed quietly. No notes. No names. Nothing written down. The guerrillas used the intelligence immediately. Convoys were ambushed when security was light. Patrols were hit when units rotated away. Supply shortages increased across Pampanga province. Calugas never saw the results directly, but Japanese casualties rose steadily through the summer of 1943. By October, the resistance decided he was more valuable in the field than at the mill. They had enough spies. They needed fighters. A guerrilla unit known as Squadron 227 Old Bronco operated in the mountains under Major Robert Lapham and Captain Harry Mackenzie, both American officers who had escaped Bataan. The unit numbered roughly 300 men, former soldiers, students, farmers, civilians willing to fight. They needed an artillery specialist. Kaluga's fit. The escape was set for October 23, 1943. At midday, Kalugas left the mill for lunch. He walked into the jungle and did not return. Farmers sheltered him. Guides moved him through patrol gaps. Japanese checkpoints were avoided by minutes. On October 25th, he reached Old Bronco headquarters in the mountains. Lapham interviewed him personally. Identity confirmed. Medal of Honor verified. Combat history understood. Kalugas was promoted to second lieutenant and given command of a weapons platoon. He was back in the war. But this war followed different rules. No front lines. No artillery batteries. No resupply columns. Guerrilla warfare meant scouting for weeks, striking once, then vanishing. Captured guerrillas were tortured and executed. Civilians who helped them were massacred. Kalugas adapted quickly. His platoon specialized in raids on Japanese supply depots. They studied targets, learned guard patterns, attacked at weak points, seized weapons and food, destroyed what they could not carry. By early 1944, Kalugas had led 17 successful raids. No casualties. The Japanese placed a bounty on the officer responsible. They did not know his name or his history. They only knew someone was disrupting operations across Nueva Ecija. In June 1944, Allied forces landed in Normandy. The war was turning. In the Pacific, General MacArthur advanced north through New Guinea. The guerrillas intensified operations. Squadron 227 received orders to attack the Japanese garrison at Karangalan, a fortified position with machine guns, mortars, and roughly 200 troops. The attack began August 7, 1944, at 0300 hours. 3 guerrilla companies surrounded the garrison. Kalugas led the assault element. Rifle fire and grenades opened the attack. The Japanese responded with mortars and machine guns. The fight lasted 4 hours. Ammunition was limited. Every shot counted. At 0700 hours, the Japanese commander surrendered. Japanese losses: 117 killed, 83 captured. Guerrilla casualties: 23. The position could not be held. The guerrillas stripped the garrison of weapons, freed Filipino prisoners, burned the site, and withdrew into the mountains before reinforcements arrived. The pattern repeated across Luzon. Attack. Win. Disappear. In January 1945, American forces landed on Luzon. Liberation had begun. Kalugas intensified operations, destroying bridges, ambushing retreating units, cutting communications. The Japanese withdrawal accelerated. By April, American control was re-established. Kalugas rejoined the United States Army. On April 30, 1945, 3 years after earning it, he finally received his Medal of Honor. The ceremony took place at Camp Olivas, Pampanga Province. Major General Richard Marshall read the citation. Kalugas stood in a clean uniform for the first time in years. The medal recognized one day, January 16, 1942, when a cook ran 1,000 yards under fire and held a Japanese advance for 6 hours. Kalugas accepted the medal without expression. He knew how many others had done as much and received nothing. After the ceremony, he accepted U.S. citizenship and a commission as a regular Army officer. He served in Okinawa, then in the United States, retiring in 1957 as a captain after 27 years of service. Civilian life followed. Education, work, family. He helped organize survivor associations so men who had endured Bataan and the camps could speak or remain silent, among those who understood. Jose Kalugas died in 1998, aged 90. His Medal of Honor rests at Fort Sill, where he once trained. A sculpture on Mount Samet shows him running toward the gun, one moment, frozen in bronze. A cook, one gun, one decision, enough to change the course of a battle.